So let's take a look at Grails, do a quick demo. So grails.org is the website. You can download things from there. Grails pairs well with Eclipse and Spring. We're going to be using Grails 2. It's the current release. I think Grails 1 is still supported at this point, but anyway, you can download and get started. I'm going to be using the command line version. So let's say we want to create a gradebook. So I use the command Grails create app, and it just complained here that I need a Java home set. Obviously Grails depends on Java. There's a good reminder of it. So it created the gradebook app, and there's a whole bunch of files in here right now. So let's just take a look at what it dropped in here. There's an application.properties, there's a Grails app directory with a lot of things in here. I18N is internationalization stuff, a bunch of language messages. There's a configuration directory. Notice these aren't XML files, these are Groovy files. So the configuration is actually written in the language that you'll be writing your app in, which is pretty nice. There's things, controllers, services, domain. Domain we can think of as model, controller, we're thinking of MVC, and what's the V? Views. So we have a bunch of views in here. Notice that there is index.gsp. Well, we're dealing with Groovy files. What do you think GSP stands for? We had JSPs for views, so GSPs are Groovy server pages. Very similar. Web app. We have our webinf and CSS and JavaScript and so on. And test directory and source. So that's what our blank project looks like. So now we need to tell Grails that we want to create a domain class. So Grails create domain class, and let's say we want to create a grade object. So this takes a little bit. It'll create it, and it creates two files. One is the actual domain class, and the other is a test, a unit test. And this is nice so that I can say how this object should work, and then if anyone else develops on it, or if I develop on it later and break an expectation, my unit test will catch that, and that's a great way to develop or develop with a team. So let's take a look at the object it created. So this looks a lot like Java. There's a package up at the top. Notice we're missing a semicolon. There's a class, and there's constraints. So we're missing some things like public and so on, but Groovy just doesn't make us type that redundant information. So typically we're going to be creating a public class. We don't need to say public on there. And now if we were going to add our member variables, our fields here, a grade might have a name like lab1. So typically in Java we would do private string name. And you might have a score out of 10 or something. Private int score. And then these are private, so we would have to have getters and setters for it if this was Java. And just to remember how much of a pain that is, string get name. And if I was in Eclipse, I would auto-generate this. So that's one getter, and I'd have to write the setter, and then the getter and the setter for the score. With Groovy, if we just declare string name, it's going to have getters and setters for us, and it's just going to be the default ones. And we also can drop the semicolons. It doesn't need them. So we created, so this is basically a simple object. It has a name and a score. And we can save that. Let's create a student as well. Let's let Grails create it for us. Alright, so it's created that for us. And student has a name, force a habit, putting semicolons on. String, student has a name, let's give him an ID as well. And let's go ahead and have a relationship as well. So it has many grades. And this is how we can tie it together. So a student has many grades. And we're not going to mess with the constraints in here, but constraints would basically say like the name is not empty and so on and so forth. Alright, so we've set up a student and a grade object. Let's ask Grails to generate a whole bunch of, prototype the application for us. So generate all, and this is going to generate the views, the controller, and maybe some more tests for us. And let's ask it to generate the student stuff for us as well. Now, I'm just going to make sure that my port 8080 is open. Alright, and I'm going to ask Grails to start up. So Grails has its built-in container, and we can just say Grails run app, and it is going to compile everything and deploy everything. So we don't need to push it out to a separate Tomcat, although we could have it do that. We're just going to stay in development mode and run the application from right here. So it says server's running, and we should be able to browse to this URL. Let's check it out. So here's the landing page for our URL, which we haven't customized yet. It says welcome to Grails, cool, application status, plugins, and there's a couple controllers here for us. So we have a grade controller and a student controller. So we're able to create a new grade, and by default the grade is showing us the list and there are none, but we can create a new one. We'll say Lab 1, and we'll just give it a score of 10. So now the list is updated. I also have the edit. I can view that individual one. I can edit that individual one. And we might, hide the new grade. We might hide this and just have the student controller. Let's see what this gets us. So we see that this is tying together the grades that are available with the student. So probably what I should do is update the toString or something, so that I would probably update my application so that when I create a student, I can create a grade from within the student. I don't have to create grades separately and then come over here and choose the student's grade. But let's just put in Joe here, and now Joe is a student and he has a grade, and it's just showing us the ID, the type and the ID, and we could customize that. But that's a good start. So it looks like Joe got a 10 on Lab 1, and we can see all of the grades, and we can update the view. This is sort of what we get for free, and now we can update the view to say, all right, this is Joe's Lab 1 score, and this is Jane's Lab 1 score, and this is John's Lab 1 score. So that's a really quick way to just prototype an application. Let's look and see what it created. So I killed that. I killed the application. Just hitting Control C, and let's take a look at what new stuff we have in here. So we have some stuff in the classes directory. So we have a controller that it created for us. We'll take a look at that. We have a domain object, and we saw that earlier on. That was actually the only code that we wrote, was the domain objects, was the student. We said the student has many grades, and a student has a name, and a grade has a name and a score. And then it created these views for us also, the show, or the read, the edit, or the update, the list, another read of the group of them, and the create, and so on, for grade and student. So let's look at a couple of these things. So let's look at the grade controller. So we see some things that sort of make sense. Here we say that allowed method, so we're still dealing with HTTP, obviously. We have an index action, and if someone just comes to /grades, this is just going to redirect them to the list, and we actually saw that happen. And when the list is called, it's going to go to the database and get get all of these grades, and we'll take a look at how the data sources are configured. And on save, we have a flash scope to say, all right, that thing was created, and edit, and so on. Let's look at one of the GSPs. So let's look at the grade show.gsp. So this has some G tags in it. So this isn't quite a JSP, but it's a groovy server page. And we see that there's a bunch of HTML, and then in there is some links and messages. If there's a flash message, it'll pop that up. And this, again, this was all just automatically generated for us. And there's EL available to us. So this is a good starting point to just play around with a groovy application. So one other thing I want to show is the configuration. And let's look at the data source configuration, I guess. So the configuration typically in an application is done with XML. This is actually done in Groovy. And we've got a data source, and this is using an in-memory driver. And if we wanted to use a real database, we would just come here and update that to use Postgres or MySQL or Oracle or whatever you use. Grails has the concept of environments, so you might have a data source for development, which is just using an in-memory database. And the objects that you create will automatically have the schema set for them. So it knows that there's a foreign key between grades and students because we said has many. So it creates and it knows what columns it needs because of the fields that we put in and so on, and the types. So in development, it'll just, every time we fire up the development environment, it's just going to whip up a new database schema for us. And it'll say, I need these tables, and why don't you drop them first and then create them. In test, it's just going to update the schema. And then in production, it's going to update the schema. I would probably change, I probably wouldn't like the idea of an application automatically updating the database in production. I would probably just have it set to like validate or something like that to say like, if there's a problem, then let me know and I'll address it. I'll manage the schema myself in production. But we can have different data sources for production, and this is written in Groovy, as is the rest of the configuration files. So we have application resources, bootstrap, which is when this app is firing up, what it's going to do, and so on and so forth. So that's pretty much it for Groovy. A great way to prototype an application to get things going, and then customize from there.